welcome to Be Empowered, the podcast. This is a podcast where we dive into the realities of healthcare and entrepreneurship. We always offer our opinion unfiltered and apologetic, and always with a dose of empowerment. We're here to amplify your voices and our voices and challenge the status quo and explore what it really means to thrive. So let's get into it. I'm Dr. Santoshi Balakota.
And I'm Dr. Shala Mokbel.
This is a continuation of our previous conversation about the gender bias in medicine. Last time we touched on a few different topics. So we talked about the gender pay gap, the fact that there's limited leadership and advancement options for women in medicine. We also talked about the higher burnout rates in medicine. And all of that leads to less in terms of mentorship programs for women, support in terms of our career growth. There's less pay transparency for women. So overall, we're working just as hard, if not harder, but we're getting paid less. So all of those things are very important in our professional career. This episode, we're going to focus a little bit more on our personal lives and how those are affected with being a female physician. And I think, Shala and I are good people to talk about this because there is juxtaposition. For instance, I started dating while I was in training, met my husband while I was in training, and now we're in our fertility journey. Shala met her husband a little earlier on in her medical career, has had two boys, and is balancing now being a mom and being a physician. So we're both on the same journey, but in different points of it. So I think we're pretty well equipped to talk about, kind of the challenges in terms of work-life balance as it pertains to women. So Shala, why don't you go first? Tell me your whole story, your whole life story.
Well, I was in a relationship for a long time. When I left my original country, I was with someone and we were together for 8 years. I would say, luckily, we didn't have kids because we were going under a lot of pressure financially and emotionally. But when I entered medical school, I was basically kind of single. And that first year of medical school was feeling lonely, even though I went out a lot, but I felt lonely. I was with someone for 8 years, so it was challenging to just all of a sudden not have anybody, and I didn't have family support either in the United States, so it was very challenging. And then second year of medical school, I met my husband. At first, we were both coming from a very long relationships, and so we didn't want to commit to anything, right away. So we dated actually for good about 4 years, and then we were engaged for 2 years. But again, I was lucky because I met, this special person in medical school, and we had a connection. We were able to study together. He was not in my class. He was in the class below me, but he also took some years off. He did Master of Public Health. So he had taken some years off. So he is a year older than me, but we connected right away, and we were able to have like a circle of friends together. We studied together. It was a good few years for me because I felt very supported by him. But I know that there are other people in my class that were struggling, for dating, because how to date, you can't go out a lot. And I would say there was a cohort of people that would go out, okay? There were majority of the people in our class, or the students in our class, would not go out. They were studying all the time, and you have to perform really well to be able to get into the residency that you want. So a lot of people in our class, or some people started dating and it didn't work out, and after a couple of years, they kind of, went to their ways. And then there was this residency match that we had a problem with too. So as a couple, if you are in the same class, then you can do couples matching, right? But if you are not in the same class, then one of you matches that year. So I matched, in DC area, and then my husband, Tom, he had to do his match the following year. So then he was limited. he wanted to be close to me, so he only choose residency programs that are around the area that I was in. We got lucky. We really got lucky that he was able to get a residency match at an area that is in Baltimore, and I was in DC, so we were able to get a house in between Baltimore and DC, and that's where we lived. He would commute to his residency for 1 hour, and I would commute to my
Wow.
residency. Yeah, and I would commute to my residency for 35 minutes, 40 minutes, depending on the traffic. So it was very challenging 3 years. Okay. After that, we decided to get married my 4th year of residency and his last year of residency as well. But he was internal medicine, so his residency was only 3 years. And that was the time that we decided, okay, this is the time we get married and we want to have kids, because I was already 35 years old. I knew that time was limited and to have kids, and I didn't want to have just one kid, because I really
Mhm.
wanted to have my kids to have the gift of having siblings. I have 2 siblings, and I didn't want just my kid to feel lonely. So I wanted them to have siblings. So that's why when I was 35 years old, right after we got married, we decided that, okay, now or never. And so we decided that we should have kids. Um, we should start planning having to have kids. So then I got pregnant, and luckily my residency program was very supportive. We had 3 other residents in our residency program that were pregnant and had babies. So the way that they structured it is basically you can have all your elective time saved for the time that you
Mhm.
um, have your baby, so you can take that time off. And that's how, and I was the administrative chief in my residency, so I was able to kind of reserve that elective time and my vacation time until my labor. Okay, so that's what I did. And for the last 3 months of residency, I was basically off, and then I went back for graduation. So that was with the first one. And then my second baby I had when I graduated from my fellowship, my second year of fellowship. So there was a 2 year gap between my babies, 2 year and 2 months gap between my babies, and that was completely very challenging, because then you have a toddler and you have another baby, and then you're graduating from fellowship, and then you have to look
Mhm.
for jobs. And that was the mistake that I made. I didn't look for jobs. I basically took the first option on the table, because I was overwhelmed in my career. I was overwhelmed with having 2 kids. We were moving. It was a lot of changes happening in my life that I couldn't I didn't want to. I was lazy. I didn't want to add more stress to my life of having
Mhm.
to deal with multiple contracts and this and that. So there is a lot more details in between this for my story, but I want to go to your story and hear from you.
Yeah, I think one thing I do want to say is I don't think you were being lazy. I think it's a lot for one person to do. If you're raising 2 kids and then to also go through contracts, and then also you were working during this time too. So I wouldn't necessarily say you were being lazy. I just think there's a lot on the table. You can't really give everything your 100%.
Yeah,
And I think, unfortunately, that's kind of what ends up happening. And that's why women or female physicians end up in some of these bad contracts, or not bad contracts, but not the best for them, because you're just so overwhelmed with everything at home. Um, and everything else going on, that you kind of just don't pay attention, because you're like, as long as it's stable, it's paying the bills, I'm okay with it. So I don't think you were being lazy. So for me, when I started medical school, I was in a serious relationship through most of medical school, actually. And we didn't work out. At the end of it, I didn't want to limit myself to the residency match based on where he wanted to be. Not because he was a bad person or anything, but simply because I just did not see a future there. And, I don't think we were on the same page. So we separated. And during residency, I was in a long term relationship with someone else as well. And we ended up breaking up, I want to say the year of or the year before I finished my neurology residency. So I finished my residency at 29. So I was 29 and newly single after being in long term relationships for a very long time. And that's when I had to get back into the dating scene, and it was extremely difficult. I was doing that in New York City, which I would argue is a very hard place to date. I met my husband actually on a dating app. We met when I was 33, about to be 34. We met in 2019. We went through a lot around the COVID time period, especially with my job as a doctor in New York City, and some of the other things I was trying to do. I got very burnt out around that time. Getting married, having kids was like the last thing on my mind. So the year we got married was the same time I left my academic job. It was a challenging year because not only was I planning a wedding, I was trying to redefine my career, what it means for me. And then, so we got married at 36. And, since then we've been on a fertility journey. And unfortunately, we've had some setbacks. So we're still trying at this time. But one thing that is important to the story that I do want to bring attention to is before I met my husband, about 6 months before I met him, I actually went through a cycle of egg freezing. And I 100% recommend this to any woman who's listening to this podcast who has any desire in the future for kids. And, egg freezing is not a guarantee that you will have a child. But it is something you can do to maybe control the biological process, because I think you and I got lucky with finding our partners. But that's not the case. It's incredibly hard to date as a female physician. And I experienced that for a few years. Your schedule is very limited. You're on call. Not every guy you meet is going to have the best intentions, because they're going to say, "Oh, you're a doctor. Tell me more." You must be very, very rich. And you're like, "Actually, no, I just have a lot of debt." So, so you're not going to meet the people who have the best of intentions either. But the one thing you can control to maybe take some of that biological pressure off you is to freeze your eggs. And I'm so glad I did that, because right now we're working on unfreezing them and making embryos. And I'm thankful I was able to do it. The one thing that I do want to bring up when it comes to fertility is, fertility issues, once you get to a certain age, are very common. But the statistic is 1 in 4 female physicians deals with infertility. And I think that's due to various factors. Age, some of us aren't getting started having children until later in life for obvious reasons. Like you did in later residency, that's when some of my colleagues had their kids as well. But you and I weren't surgical interns. If you're a surgical resident, I think that timeline is completely different. When they have their kids is usually during like a researcher or like an elective year, but the odds are stacked against you. Hopefully you're in a program that supports that. But I do know personally from a bunch of my friends that not all programs are going to be very kind if you want to take maternity leave, or if you want to have time to breastfeed or pump. Like, they just won't allow it. They're not going to not allow it, but they're not going to look on it kindly, and depends on how your co-residents are as well. So some co-residents are not going to be nice about it because they'll have to cover you when you're out. So that whole culture isn't set up to facilitate being a mother. So I do want to bring up that part. And I also want to bring up the fact that fertility care is not covered for physicians. It's not covered in a lot of different settings, but there are a lot of tech companies, a lot of corporations that will cover IVF and egg freezing. When I was doing mine, I had friends that were in law, that were in corporate, like Goldman Sachs, Amazon, Google. All of that covers women freezing their eggs. But I paid about $15,000 out of pocket to do it with my first like big attending paycheck. So why is that? Why don't we talk about these things more? I think women who are going into medicine need to be prepared that, one, you might not meet your partner till later in life. If you're lucky, you'll meet them in your 20s, but you might not meet them till you're later in life. And two, if you want to have children, start planning for that now. Freeze your eggs now, or better yet, come up with a game plan of how you're going to fit being a mother into your career as a physician. And if you don't want to have kids, I think that's fine as well. But I think, if you don't know that for sure in your 20s, because I didn't know that for sure in my 20s. I think certain things should be put in place so you at least have that insurance to do it in the future.
And you brought up a good point, because this kind of holding off life, right, goes
Hmm.
back to sacrifices that we make in medicine. And this, especially for women, the sacrifices that we have made are big, are really, really big, actually. For some women, when they get to that age, if they have not done the egg freezing and if they have not thought about it, and they get to this age where they graduated, mm, hopefully they had met someone, but then now they want to have kids, and then they have to struggle through becoming pregnant, and that doesn't happen. I certainly have friends who, when they decided to have kids, it took them years, and sometimes even after that, they had other problem like miscarriages and other things on top of your job that is so stressful, on top of all these loans that you have to pay off and you can't take time off, on top of the money that you have to spend, for fertility, for IVF, for other issues, so uh, these are the sacrifices that we make to become a physician, and then as a woman physician is even worse.
And I think that's something that needs to be discussed like very early on, even in medical school. I think we need to talk to women about this. Like, hey, you're really putting your life on hold. And I know when I started medical school, and you probably too, we were very driven. Like, you don't care what you sacrifice, you just want this career, you want to be a doctor. You don't take into account all of these things. That's why I think you certainly need like guidance from other female doctors, from female professors, someone. I mean, and sure, why not a course? Like, do like a half hour just to say, hey, this is what's happening. Plan for these things. That's probably never going to happen, but that's why we're talking about it now, because the sooner the more we talk about it, the more other people talk about it. I'm hopeful, you know hearing some of the things we're talking about will be good for future female physicians, but it's definitely something that we need to consider.
Yes, that's definitely the case. I hope that our voices get amplified, and I hope that future female physicians hear us. I hope that this gets to them, now I can talk about the issues of female physicians after having kids. I had my son right after residency, and then so during my fellowship, I was raising my toddler, and that was challenging. So no childcare support. And that was crazy to me, and how much money I had to spend, my husband and I. And I was lucky because my husband had graduated and he wasn't attending at that point. So he was making better money, but I wasn't. My paycheck was very low, and I accepted to do a 2-year fellowship. So it was very challenging to be able to pay for child care. We were very lucky that we found a family that treated our son like their boy, because we put we put my son in daycare for 2 months, and he was sick all the time. I mean, for 2 months straight, we were all sick, and I couldn't afford to be sick. Going to in
Hmm.
fellowship, especially during COVID. I can't just be sick all the time. So we pulled him out of the daycare, and there were other challenges that we didn't like. We pulled him out of daycare, and I was able to go on these nanny sharing websites, and now find a nanny, find a family to do nanny share with. And we were very lucky that we found a family that we could do nanny share with, that they raised my son like their son. So my husband and I would drop him off at 7:30 in the morning, or even 7 in the morning, to their house, and then we would pick him up like at 5:30 p.m. And this whole time
Hmm.
my son was in this other family's house. And it was interesting because their primary language at home was Spanish. So my son's first language was Spanish, actually, not even my language. So and he would come home, and the nanny spoke Spanish only. So he would come home, and he would tell me, like, when he started talking in Spanish words, and I didn't even understand what he's saying, what he wants from me. So
That's funny.
this is, yeah, it's funny, but at the same time, I'm thinking about it. I was like, what is this? What did I do really? I
Yeah.
practically when his first year of life, I gave him to somebody else to raise, really. So then I got pregnant, and he was almost 2 years old, and we had to move and settle in another house. Um, those are other challenges that we had, because now we had a toddler, and I was having my second son, and then I was deciding, what do I do? Because for my second son, I was just graduating fellowship, but then there was this job also that I wanted to continue with. Um, but I wasn't sure, when do I start the job? How much time off I need to take? So I was able to take 2.5 months off. But then in those 2.5 months, we were kind of sort of struggling financially. Like, the paycheck that you get from the government for family, for maternal time, is not that much, and it was based on the residency paycheck too. So it was really not ideal, but I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I have my two beautiful boys right now. I've learned to kind of manage life and personal life and my job together, and my responsibilities and duties at work. But every now and then I still have these challenges where I have to deal. Okay, we had a nanny, we had to deal with the nanny calling sick all the time, um, you know and other problems at school. I get a call from school, your kid is doing this, your kid is doing that, and then I can't go. There was one time, actually, they called me and they said my son is having a stomach pain. I told them, okay, I need half an hour because I'm with a patient right now, and they tell me, okay, but come as soon as possible. And I go there. He's fine. He was fine, but I was thinking to myself, this is it's not easy. This is not easy. You just have to drop everything. And then if your job is not supportive of that, if your job makes it hard for you to say, oh, I have to, block my calendar for this, or I have to start rounds a little bit later, and they're not supportive of that, and they say, no, you have to start round at this time, then what do you do? It's just impossible sometimes. Sometimes I felt that I was so stressed out and overwhelmed with having to deal, especially in the mornings, with drop-offs. My husband has to be in clinic at 8 o'clock. I have to be back by 8 o'clock to see the patients. So it's very, very challenging.
Yeah. And even before you get to that point, like maternity leave, you said you had 2.5 months?
Yeah, so I took 2.5 months, but then you have to accept it without pay, right? So that is an issue. When
Yeah.
you just graduated and you have the loans that's starting, and
Hmm.
you probably have a house that you bought, and other financial responsibilities. So what do you do?
Yeah. What do you do? I think some of my colleagues who have had their children in like their academic careers, I think they maybe got 2 to 3 months as the standard for paid leave, but it's not even like leave. It's accumulated like vacation time and sick leave,
Yes.
right? It's not like separate. They're just going to be so kind and give you 3 months off paid. Like no one's doing that. Um, and then I think some jobs, and this is important for the women listening to keep in mind, some jobs you have to be at a company for at least a year before they even give you those 12 weeks. Maternity leave, certainly, I think overall as a country, we need to do better, but especially when it comes to our female physicians, because our job isn't like your regular 9 to 5. Our job requires a lot of thinking. I'm not saying 9 to 5s don't require thinking. Our job requires, we have to be very, very present, because if we do something wrong, people can get hurt. And it's really hard to come back to that 2 months after having a baby, especially when the baby's sick or things come up. So I think maternity leave, we definitely need to do better. I mean, again, overall as a country, we need to do better, but especially for female physicians. The second thing is childcare. I think childcare is an issue everywhere, right? And a lot of people have issues with childcare. But the cost of childcare is one thing, and the availability of childcare is also sparse from what I understand. And it's really hard to pay for either if you're a resident trying to have kids. I have no idea. Do you know what residents are doing when they need childcare? Are they just doing daycare, or are they having family support? Because I can't even think of affording all of these things before my current attending status, you know?
Right. So my co-residents who had their kids early on, they either had non-physician husbands or
Partners,
spouses.
yeah.
Yes. And that was helpful because some of them, again, it's our job is very demanding. And, some other jobs are demanding, but our job is more demanding. This is my observation. And a lot of my friends or family friends who are dual physician households, they struggle more, and which is sad, which is very sad to see. But those who have like one physician and one engineer, or one in tech, or the other one is a lawyer, like for example, I have a friend who, she is a hospitalist, but her husband is a lawyer. They have 5 kids, and they're able to
Wow.
handle their 5 kids. A lot of times, the kids are at home with the husband while he's working. It's impossible to do that with our job, right? It's just not
Yeah.
possible. Or even when I drop off my son, for example, I see that I feel that I'm the only one rushing, and then I see like other, kind of parents are relaxed. They're not highly stressed. But I feel like I'm the only one, and the other ones that are highly stressed are either nurses or nurse practitioners, just in healthcare in general. They are in healthcare that they have to go back to their jobs. Like for example, my son had a performance in school, and they scheduled it for 10:30. Okay, it's a dance performance, and they're toddlers, so I want to be there. But when I got there, again, I'm the only one like looking at my phone, trying, to see if I have patients or not. And then I was looking at my left side, and there was another friend who was also um, working as a physician, and she was doing the same thing. She was so stressed, and she was like, oh my god, like I have to go back, the patient is waiting for me, or I'm getting messages for the patients, and things like that. So even when we want to be engaged with our kids, it's impossible. You cannot disconnect from work, and you're always like in the back of your mind thinking that, I have to go back to work. Like someone is going to complain right now about me, so so it's
Hmm.
very frustrating, very frustrating.
And I'm sure it makes you feel guilty too. Like you
Yes,
can't be there present for them. And then you feel guilty that you can't be present at work. I mean, at this point, I think you and I are to a point where we're good at setting boundaries. We don't feel guilty about that anymore. But more importantly, the things that matter in life, being a parent, being a mother, I'm sure there's guilt that comes with it. I can't even enjoy this time with my child without people bothering me.
definitely. And the guilt came later. So I was doing this for the first 3 years of, their life. Basically, I was so committed. I put more than 100% on my job to get promoted, to get to the
Hmm.
leadership role. Um, and basically, I was just, giving it more than I should. Then I would say it's been about a year that I decided that I need to be present for my kids. I really need to change my lifestyle. I need to set boundaries.
Hmm.
I need to change things in my work, because if I don't, I'm missing a lot. I can't disconnect, and I need to disconnect.
And I think one word to simplify all that is just say no.
Yeah.
You have to say no. You have to set boundaries. Do you think it's possible for a female physician to have it all?
I think it's very challenging, and it would be possible if they have good support at home, if they have a supportive spouse and partner. And because I know a lot of them are even single moms, right? So I don't know
Mhm.
how they do it. My husband really puts in 50% into our life, our personal life, and the kids' life. But I can't even imagine if you know if I was a single mom. It's just not
Hmm.
comprehensible for me how they can survive, right? So I think it's not that it's not doable, but you really have to have the support. You have to have a plan. As you said, I really think that um, you're right. We have to educate our female trainees on planning your life ahead. Don't wait for last minute. Have a plan for egg freezing, and what you want to do later. When do you want to have your kids? Do you want to have one? Do you want to have two? It's better to be prepared early on. And then even the childcare. So I didn't know this, but in my area, you have to you're waitlisted for childcare. It's not that okay, you decide next month I want to have childcare, and you have childcare. It's not that's not the case. So we had to put my son's name for daycare months in advance, months in
Hmm.
advance. So you have to have a plan for those few months until they get into daycare. So really, again, there's a lot going on, and you have to be on top of everything in addition to be on top of your job.
I think, kind of wrapping it up to circle back to what you said, yes, you do have to be planned. Um, keep keep this kind of stuff in mind when you also decide what kind of jobs you want to take.
Mhm.
This is something, you shouldn't base your specialty around one thing, but it's something definitely to factor in. There are some specialties where I think it's easier to do this than others. Um, and despite what specialty you choose, the contracts you sign after your training, see what's important to you. If it's going to be important for you to be a mother, your home life's going to be important to you, then that should influence the type of contract you sign. If you have unlimited childcare options and you think you can do both, then go for it. That you can sign a contract that reflects that. But ultimately, I think, like you said, Shala, being prepared, and having more of these types of conversations are definitely important. And before we started this podcast, we even talked about we could do a whole other episode on this topic alone, and maybe
I think we
we'll
should.
ask the listen. I think we should too, and I think we'll ask the listeners if there's anything that we touched on that resonated with you, or if you want us to talk about something specifically, if you want to share about your personal story. Certainly, anonymously, you can send us an email at empoweredmedlife, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com. You can follow us on socials at empoweredmedlife.com. You can follow us individually, but definitely, we want to hear from you. The point of this conversation is to engage our community, and hopefully do better for the subsequent doctors out there.
I think that we can do another episode on this. We have a lot to discuss, and I'm sure there are other stories that we will get from the audience that we can share with the rest. Because again, this is a very important topic to talk about, and I hope that we contribute to a change in women in medicine. So thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and rate, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Stay strong, stay empowered, and we'll see you soon.